What is going on, guys? It is the Film Physician here, back with another video. Today we're going to be reviewing the Harrison Ford film Air Force One. If you guys want to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be great, much appreciated by me. But anyway, let's get straight into this. Short intro, let's just start. Air Force One is a difficult movie to review for many reasons. Because, first off, there's a lot of good things in the film. There's some stuff that I think is done very well, but there's also some stuff that's done very poorly, and for me, it's a mixed bag, a más o menos, if you will. Now, if you don't know what type of film Air Force One is, and if you've never seen it before, let me give you a quick rundown of it. If you've ever seen the movie Die Hard, Air Force One is like under that like big like genre of like action films, but it's like a one-man army action film, but with a twist. See, compared to many 80s action films like with Schwarzenegger and Stallone, movies like the Die Hard genre, if you will, like that genre of one-man army films popularized by Die Hard, has a little difference. Sure, it's one guy versus a bunch of other guys and he has to take them all out, but in a Die Hard-like film, it's different because you see the character, the avatar, if you will, go through hell. In Die Hard, we see John McClane go through absolute hell to take each bad guy out one by one by one by one, and to eventually save his wife, Holly Gennaro. Generally, in a Die Hard-like film, the person has to go and sneak around. There's usually these terrorists who take over a building, a plane, or whatever, boat, etc. Doesn't matter what. They usually want something in return, whether it be political, or they just want to kill a bunch of people, or they want money, or whatever. And even though there were films before Die Hard that had this kind of framework and style, Die Hard was the one that really popularized it, and we saw a bunch of films trying to imitate it afterwards. For example, Snakes on a Plane and Air Force One are just basically Die Hard, but on a plane. And then you have other films where it's like, it's Die Hard on a bus, it's Die Hard on a train, it's Die Hard like wherever. You just swap out in and out the locations and change up the script a little bit. But for the most part, they're all the same. So to give you a little background on Air Force One as a movie, it's basically a Die Hard film that's in a plane with the president facing off against terrorists. And on face value, this sounds like a really good idea, but the execution and the story sometimes have some hiccups, and I'd say that the bad definitely outweighs the good here. If you look at Rotten Tomatoes, you'll see that this film got actually a pretty good, or not, I shouldn't say pretty good, but pretty decent rating. Today we're going to be really picking apart the stupidity of this film and exposing it for why people dislike it so much. Because although critics like it, majority of the fans and general movie community think of this film to be pretty terrible, and it kind of is, and we'll be seeing that today. So without further ado, let's get straight into this. Our film starts out with a pretty good action scene where we see 5 paratroopers drop on top of this building and proceed to head inside it to try and apprehend the suspect and get him on a helicopter and get him the hell out of there. The action scenes are really good in this film, and honestly, I think the gun sound effects and the gunplay in the movie are actually really good, if you care about that sort of thing, that is. The action scenes for me have a defined set style that I really enjoyed throughout my multiple viewings for this review. But when we dig deeper into this opening scene and apply it to like the rest of the film, we come up with the biggest problem in Air Force One. So, the conflict, if you can even call it that, surrounding Air Force One is the characters in the film have very shallow, unexplained, and very terrible motivations for what they're doing. The film revolves around this one guy, General Radek, he's the guy we see in the beginning of the film being apprehended by the U.S. Special Forces units. The terrorists in this film hijacked Air Force One because they care so much about General Radek. They tell us that he has like some big, like that the Kazakhstan has this big nuclear like arsenal, and that if Radek were to be released, then he would unleash his, I guess, nuclear arsenal against the world. But this immediately gives us a problem. Why does Kazakhstan hate Russia and America so much in this movie? Where did Kazakhstan get their nuclear missiles from? How big of an army does Kazakhstan have? Is Kazakhstan a real threat to U.S. security? Why does John Marshall, the president in the film, act like Kazakhstan such a big threat to America? You do realize that Kazakhstan is on the opposite side of the planet, right? And I doubt a nation like Kazakhstan is going to have intercontinental missiles that can actually reach the United States. This also begs the question early on that why Radek is so important to these nuclear missiles. Does he have the codes to the nuclear missiles? Why can't they just launch the missiles without him? Is like the whole country just stopped because he was captured? Air Force One is in a conundrum right now because when you think about it, everything relies on this idea that Radek is the key to Kazakhstan being able to use their nuclear arsenal and being a threat. Apparently, if they don't have Radek, then Kazakhstan's not a threat. That's not how things work, and I understand this is realistic fiction, but you gotta remember the realistic part. Kazakhstan is a real nation, as a real country in the world. And this film follows a lot of real-world scenarios and reactions to events. If Donald Trump, for example, were to die, that doesn't mean that America all of a sudden just stops functioning and isn't a threat in the world anymore. Mark Pence would just step in his place, and then everything would just go kind of back to normal. If Trump were to be captured, the U.S. military and its nuclear arsenal wouldn't just completely disappear and not be able to be used. No, if anything, it would be used in order to retaliate against the people who did steal the president. Why hasn't Kazakhstan already bombed the United States and Russia if they just stole their dictator? Why is Radek so important? Is he just like a really good general or a really good leader? The movie gives us the impression that he's just some genocidal murderer. He doesn't sound like that special of a guy. We know this because he doesn't say anything in the film. He just grunts while he's getting choked out and dragged through the front door. These questions and problems and crappy foundations that are put in place early on in the film really hurts the film's main antagonist, which is the terrorist led by Gary Oldman. Bad guys have to have motivations too. They can't just be generic evil machines. If you want your film to be engaging and have active characters that we want to root for and root against, you need to give them motivations for the things they're doing. The good guy has to have motivations for doing the right thing and for trying to take down the bad guy. The bad guy has to have motivation for why he's doing all this evil shit. In Air Force One, both sides are missing from the puzzle. Gary Oldman's character and his terrorist plead are just built on a shouty foundation, so we don't care. It just seems like he's killing all these people and hijacking this plane because the plot needs him to. His burning desire for Radek to be released doesn't have any weight to it. How is Radek gonna change anything? Why can't Kazakhstan just go 5 seconds without their dictator? Do they just completely collapse and just become such a big fucking non-threat as soon as their dictator is removed? Does Radek have the nuclear launch codes in his head or something? Why do they desperately need Radek in order for their nuclear arsenal to be a threat to Russia and the United States of America? Also, we're not really ever told if these terrorists are fighting for the cause of communism. I mean, they say they hate capitalists a couple times in the film, but they don't exactly say they're communist. They could be communist, they could be socialist, they could be fascist. We don't know. We need to know in this film why Gary Oldman and his terrorists hate America so much. We get a half-baked explanation when he's talking to Harrison Ford in the cockpit of the plane. He says some stuff about how the capitalists of America gave Russia over to a bunch of filthy gangsters who polluted his country or something. I don't know, who cares? Like I've said before in the video already, if your villain doesn't have compelling motivation for doing evil shit they do, then they're just a generic evil machine, and I shouldn't care. So if your villain's bad, then at least your protagonist has to be good, right? Right? The president in this film, also known as John Marshall, also known as in real life as Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford does his best to make this garbage script work, but once again, he has no motivation for what he's doing. His foundation as a character is just built on his own stupidity of his own actions. At the beginning of the film, he makes a big speech and tells a new policy of America that they're not going to negotiate with terrorist governments. Which sounds cool, but then you see him later on in the film, his wife and daughter are at risk of dying, and he decides he's just going to give up everything, his whole country, everything he was sworn into, just so that he can save his family. I want to remind the audience that the people in the film make it very clear over and over and over again that if Radek is released, that millions of people will die. Millions! And what's Harrison Ford's reaction to this? He just goes, fuck it. I'm just gonna give up my whole nation, everything, let millions of people die so that 2 people can live. I'm no rocket scientist, but I can tell you that millions of people is a little bit greater than just 2 people. In the words of Jeremy Jam from South Park,
you don't even have to be Asian to do math that simple.
But I will say that the static characters in this film, the ones that don't change at all, are just kind of cardboard cutouts. At least they mesh together well, and they have some comedic moments, and they're doing their best to make this garbage script work. Air Force One is built on shoddy foundations, but it at least tries its hardest to make this shit work. But sometimes it's just so unexcusably bad that you can't look away. The whole situation, like with this triangle of war between America, Russia, and Kazakhstan, makes no sense. We're never told if these guys are communist or not. We don't understand their motivations and why their actions will eventually lead to America's destruction or to millions of other people dying. The film makes the biggest mistake of telling us and not showing us the destruction that Radek is bringing upon the Middle East. We're just told about it and not shown, and why should I care? You know what I mean? It's like looking at a Wikipedia article. It's just like plain words on a page. And if your film's gonna be boring, then I'm gonna be boring, and I'm just gonna end this review because at this point there's not much more else to talk about. The film's kind of long, and it just isn't nearly as good as Die Hard. It tried to take the static elements from Die Hard and tried to accelerate them to higher planes of conflict. Like, for example, instead of wanting money, in this film, the terrorists want, like, a political figure to be released from prison. Let's compare these two. Why do the terrorists in Die Hard want the $230 million in barrier bonds, or whatever the hell amount of money it is? Well, because, it's money. Money's great. You can sustain your lifestyle choices. It can help you to buy materialistic things. It puts food on the table. It gives you power, etc., etc. Although money is kind of a bland and not really deep motivation for the terrorists and Die Hard doing what they're doing, it at least is as concrete as a concrete goal for the terrorists in the film and gives them a reason for doing the evil shit they do. But then we look at Air Force One and we see how a political figure being released from prison is much harder to explain and to contextualize. Why do the terrorists in Air Force One want Radek released? What will happen if Radek is released? What will Radek being released directly affect the terrorists in the plane? I mean, if we go through each one of these questions, we see that they're just very convoluted and there's a bunch of problems with them. If we go to the question, why do they want Radek to be released? Well, we think about it. Is it because they hate America and they want to make Americans suffer? Is it because they want Mother Russia to be one great nation again? Is it just because Radek was just a good friend of them before? I mean, we're not really given an answer. We're not given a clear motivation for our antagonists, and they just kind of feel like wandering lost characters. If they want to harm America so bad, why don't they just launch the nuclear missiles at America, assuming that they can reach them? If they want Mother Russia to be one great nation again, then how's Radek gonna change any of that? There's no way in any fictional or real life universe where Kazakhstan can stand up to America and Russia combined. So we don't know why the terrorists in the plane, why they're doing what they're doing, why they want Radek released. What will happen then again? Then you have to ask the question: what will happen if Radek is released? What negative repercussions will that have on America? We don't really know. The movie just tells us and doesn't give any reasoning behind it. I'll reiterate again: Kazakhstan versus Russia, America, and like the rest of the United Nations and NATO is not gonna work out for Kazakhstan. They would never fight a war like that in a fictional universe or in a real universe, in the real world. And how will Radek being released directly affect the terrorists inside the plane? Well, just makes them very happy for no fucking reason at all. I swear, did like a 5-year-old write the script to this movie? And what makes Gary Oldman's character here think that just because he hijacks Air Force One that they're ever gonna allow Radek, apparently a guy who can kill millions of people with his nuclear arsenal, well, they're never gonna let him go and trade for the passengers on Air Force One. 50 people compared to millions of people is a very big difference. In Die Hard, however, it's different. It's the terrorists want money, and in return, they for the hostages. It's a very easy, clear-cut, simple, and functionable reason for the terrorists doing what they want to do. Money for people makes a lot more sense and is a lot more likely to happen than a couple people and hostages for literally millions of people and hostages. I'm just so frustrated by the lack of creativity and explanation, because this film could have been really good. It certainly had the cast to make a really great film. Damn shame that they wasted this great, incredible cast on such a shitty, poorly thought out movie that has decent action scenes. To summarize, Air Force One could have probably been one of the best action films we've seen in ages, but it's unfortunately plagued with underdeveloped characters that have terrible motivations, terrible world building, and terrible stakes and organizations. The great cast and decent action films were destroyed by these crippling flaws and the terrible CGI, making Air Force One a pretty pitiful movie in comparison. I honestly have to say that instead of being a really good film, for me, this film just kind of equals itself out. I'd probably give it a rating of around 55% because it's just a zero-sum game. There's just as many bad things in the film as there are good things, and for me, that puts me in the 50% to 60% range. I'd maybe say personally I'd put it a tad higher. I'd maybe give it like 3 out of 5 stars, maybe even 4 out of 5 stars, because I like the action and the cast enough sometimes to look past a garbage script. But in my critical eyes, this film is absolute garbage and is poo-poo. But what is your opinion? Did you like Air Force One? Do you think it's a good film or a bad film? Tell me in the comments below, and please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for new episodes of gaming and movie reviews coming out in the future.